All right, Jen's giving us the thumbs up, so I think we're good to go. Thank you everybody for joining us today and your interest in the Australian renewable energy market and power purchase agreements. Just a couple of housekeeping issues to start off with. Can everyone please put their name onto their Zoom so that we know who you are, and turn on your videos. Today's session is going to be recorded. However, we won't be recording the breakout rooms at the end, but we'll touch on more of that later. When the speakers are speaking, if you have any questions, and we hope you do, please post them in the chat section, but there will also be opportunities for people to raise their hands and contribute at that during the question time as well. For those who don't know me, my name is Aaron Gray. I'm Yarra City Council Sustainable Business Officer, and I'll be your MC for today. First of all, I'd like to welcome everybody attending on behalf of Yarra City Council, and we acknowledge the Wurundjeri Wurrung people as the traditional owners and the true sovereigns of the land known as Yarra. We also acknowledge the significant contributions made by other Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people to life in Yarra. We pay our respects to the elders from all nations here today and to their elders past, present and future. With that, I'd like to pass over to Michael Oak, or Moke, our sustainability team leader, who's going to give you an introduction today, and then we'll come back and I'll provide an overview of how we're going to run today's session. Michael, over to you.
Thanks, Aaron, and hi everyone. It's my really great pleasure to welcome you to this exciting webinar on renewable energy PPAs and how your business can go 100% renewable. We've pulled together what I think is a fabulous agenda that we have planned, and I'm sure you'll get a lot out of this session. Here at Yarra, we have a vision to be a city which is a leader in tackling the causes and impacts of climate change. Recently, we adopted our first climate emergency plan, setting a framework to respond to this most pressing issue. This includes accelerating emission reductions in our own operations, whilst also supporting the achievement of zero net emissions across the whole municipality by 2030. We know we will only achieve this if we act with urgency and if we do so together. And this is why it's so heartening to have you all joining with us today and hopefully furthering your own journey towards zero emissions. Yarra has long had a focus on operating as a sustainable business. Since 2012, we've been a certified carbon neutral organisation, and in the last 10 years, we've achieved actual carbon emission reductions of more than 70%. Key actions towards this have included energy efficiency upgrades to our buildings and public lighting, and installation of around 3,000 solar panels. As a result of these actions, we're now saving more than $600,000 per annum on our energy bills. But the single biggest and most impactful action that I believe we have taken has been to support all of our power as zero emissions renewable electricity. Since January 2019, every streetlight, every council building, and every electric vehicle has been powered by 100% renewable electricity through the Melbourne Renewable Energy Project. Not only did we cut our emissions to zero, but we also achieved greater certainty around our future energy prices, and were able to support the Victorian renewable energy industry through the construction of a new wind farm in Western Victoria. Going 100% renewable really has been great for our organisation, and we know it can be for yours as well. With more than 70% of our municipality's emissions coming from commercial and industrial sources, it's easy to see the significance of this impact as more and more businesses switch to renewable electricity. This event today is just one of the ways we're supporting this transition. We are also working towards new zero carbon standards for commercial and in residential developments in Yarra. The time for this kind of action is now. We see greater investment in renewables as a way to not only reduce emissions, but also to help our economy to build back better as we recover from the impacts of the pandemic. So that brings us to today's session. And again, what a great mix of participants we do have from both business and the developer community. We really hope that no matter where your organisation is on your journey towards sourcing 100% renewable electricity, that the presentations, discussions and connections you will make today will help strengthen your desire to get there and provide you with a greater appreciation for the pathways and mechanisms to do so. Beyond this session, Council is keen to keep engaged with you and see where we can support you in achieving a 100% renewable energy future. We truly believe that we are in this together, and based on our experience and capacity, that we have a lot to offer in supporting you on your journey. So let's keep in touch. But that's enough for me. I'll pass back to Aaron to take you through some more housekeeping and get on with today's webinar. Thank you.
Thanks, Michael. So just trying to get the slide up for today. So we're going to try and make today a little bit different to most webinars and hope to make it as interactive as we can. We really do want to encourage open discussion and ask as many questions that you can, and that will help your company to switch to renewable electricity. We have three excellent speakers speaking today. Jonathan Prendergast of the Business Renewables Centre Australia will give you an overview of the current power purchase agreement market in Australia. Liam Henderson of Melbourne City Council will talk to their experience having led two buying group power purchase agreements with local businesses. And Stephen Peters of ISPT, one of Australia's largest property investors and developers, will talk about their journey to entering into a power purchase agreement and how the process worked for them. Following our three speakers, we have 20 minutes set aside for Q&A and then a further 15 minutes for unrecorded discussion in breakout rooms with the speakers to finish. We'll talk more about that later. However, first up, just as a little bit of an icebreaker, we're going to push you into breakout rooms for the next 2 to 3 minutes, and we'd just like you to introduce yourselves to hopefully some new people. They are random, so if they are people you know, apologies. Introduce yourself and tell a few of the other people what you hope to get out of today. All right, so can we do that, Finn?
You can continue on.
Yeah, great, thanks, Jen. Welcome back, everyone. Hopefully we didn't lose anyone on that little journey there. I'm now going to hand you over to Jonathan from the Business Renewables Centre for Australia for a market update on PPAs. Jonathan is the founding technical director at BRC-A. His role includes developing the BRC-A's tools, guides and primers, as well as hosting buyer and developer boot camps on corporate PPAs. As we go, please type any questions that you have into the chat function. We'll be collating them for the Q&A. But Jonathan, over to you.
Great. Thanks, Aaron. Thanks, everyone, for attending today, and thanks for the City of Yarra for setting this up and hosting us. I'll just get my screen sharing going. Yeah, so my presentation will just be a bit of an introduction to BRC-A and PPAs and some discussion around market updates and a bit on group deals as well, which I thought would be of interest today. In terms of renewable PPAs in Australia, Energetics keep a deal tracker, and we have that on our website too. And you can see that it's really becoming a mainstream initiative, and that the renewables generally went through a boom in 2017 and 18, and 2019 was letting the dust settle kind of year with less deals, and we've had a really active year in 2020 with many deals being announced in recent months. And just to highlight some of those, Amazon have done 2 deals, so with a 110 megawatt solar farm in New South Wales and 150 megawatt another solar farm in New South Wales. City of Adelaide, Transurban have done 2, Shell are building their own solar farm, Macquarie Uni and Swinburne Uni, as well as the MREP2, which you'll hear more from Liam after my presentation. So it's really an active space, lots happening, and a lot to keep track of, which is great. In terms of BRC-A, the Business Renewables Centre Australia, we're a not-for-profit 3-way partnership between Climate Kick, WWF, UTS Institute for Sustainable Futures, where I'm from, and also the Rocky Mountain Institute in the US. Basically, Google and Facebook started writing large contracts, PPAs with new wind and solar farms 6 or 7 years ago. And the Rocky Mountain Institute went to them and said, how did you do that? That's amazing. Let's collect all that information and know-how and disseminate it to corporate America. And they've created tools, guides and primers, boot camps, events, advocacy and so on into this business renewables platform around that. And now our 3 partners have brought this to Australia. We got seed funding from ARENA, Victorian Government, New South Wales Government and Queensland Government, and also are funded by solar and wind project developers and investors, as well as professional service providers. For buyers who want to come and learn about corporate PPAs through our programs and etc., and have access to our portal with the tools, guides and primers, membership is free. And we do have a boot camp on, I think it's next week or the week after, for anyone interested. So why are large corporates entering into renewable PPAs? Generally, it's not just sustainability or not just financial, it's generally a combination of the two. So sustainability around enhancing the brand, meeting green targets and sustained business value. On the financial side, we tend to not see these being justified based on cost saving because they are long-term commitments, 5, 10, 15 years. And it is unknown what energy prices will be in that future period. So it's more around hedging, that rather than being exposed to volatile market changes, you can lock in acceptable prices for 10 to 15 years. And that long-term commitment enables the finance of renewable energy projects. And in Australia, why are people doing PPAs? It is that sort of one stroke of the pen to reach that ambitious 50%, 100% renewable energy target. It's also got that financial hedging value of trying to manage energy budget risk in a volatile energy market, electricity market. But all of that would be irrelevant if solar and wind hadn't become incredibly cheap in recent years. So it's come down from so quickly. Solar farms 3 or 4 years ago were $130 per megawatt hour and come down that cost curve to $90 to $70 to $60 per megawatt hour, where the benefits are worth the costs. There are several types of PPAs. The 2 primary ones we see are wholesale or retail linked PPAs. One of BRC-A's tough role is to bring about uniform categorization and terminology for these PPAs, and we're getting there, but it's no mean feat. With wholesale PPAs, that's a contract directly between a corporate buyer and the renewable energy project or developer. They pay a fixed price, and that solar or wind farm supplies into the grid, and the market price is supplied back to the corporate buyer. So you're paying fixed and receiving a variable market price, and also receiving renewable energy certificates or LGCs. Retail linked models are less complex and brings that retailer into play an intermediary role to turn into that sort of wholesale energy market variability and complexity into a more simple retail contract, peak, shoulder and off-peak rates for 5, 10 years. There's also other models like sleeved, where the electricity customer might sign a long-term agreement with a solar or wind farm and have short-term agreements with retailers over time to provide the balance of supply in a sleeved arrangement. You can see in this wholesale model might be a fixed price for the wind or solar energy. When the spot price is high, the buyer receives money. When it's low, it pays money.
That's a big fail, isn't it? Fix up the pen.
Someone needs to go on mute with some background noise there, I think. And this really has seen the renewable energy investment market change in recent years. It used to be driven by utilities and AGL or Origin or others writing large-scale PPAs to meet their renewable energy targets, or merchant projects by independent power producers, or state government PPAs. And you can see this orange where corporate PPAs are really coming in to be a big share of renewable energy investment, and also be sustained, that it will continue to happen where retail PPAs or utility PPAs and others may change over time. And when we combine utility PPAs and merchant projects, so utility energy market deals versus corporates and state governments, You can see there was a big boom in contracts a couple of years ago, and corporates have really risen, and even in 2020 risen again. So corporates and state governments really are providing that sustained investment in renewables. Now to group deals and aggregations. There's been several of those, and even had to update my table this morning because a new deal has been announced. But City of Melbourne and MREP1 led the way, with City of Yarra being a buyer in that group. And that saw a contract with 80 megawatt Crowlands wind farm and under a retail contract with Tango. The Victorian water utilities got together and formed the Intelligent Water Network Group, and they signed a PPA, wholesale PPA directly with 200 megawatt Kiamal solar farm. Telstra led a big deal with Victorian Murrawarra wind farm that included 4 buyers, including themselves, ANZ, Coca-Cola and University of Melbourne. And I won't dwell on these, but you can see other deals, and we'll hear more about MREP2 later from Liam and Stephen. And finally, a deal that was announced on Friday last week. Griffith, Central Queensland University and Queensland University of Technology got together and signed a deal with CS Energy as the retailer to see the investment in the Coolambulla solar farm, a huge one in Queensland. Why do people group together? One reason is scale, and above 50 gigawatt hours, which is about a sort of $6 million a year electricity customer, $6 to $8 million a year electricity customer. So large and very large, you really bring the project finance value of the deal up. So if it's a 30 megawatt, $50 million project, that might be a $30 million loan from you know, a bank, NAB or ANZ or whoever. And when project finance is over 100 million, it can even be international banks. That really brings down the cost of finance by having that scale. So therefore you get very cost competitive PPAs. Under this sort of range, it might be a partial PPA with a new solar farm or wind farm, or it might be with an existing wind or solar farm or via a retailer. And then under 20 gigawatt hours, you really have to innovate with some more innovative models. So bringing together a group of say 3 to 10 buyers into a group can bring it up from that scale from 20 up to say 50 or 100 gigawatt hours per annum. So that's one of the reasons groups are forming. So benefits of scale, one is an increase, sorry, benefits of aggregation, one is the increase of scale. So you get more, you become more meaningful to projects and investors if you're a larger scale. You can create more impact by underwriting new investment, and you can achieve that lower price. There are other drivers for aggregation. You can share the transaction costs. Whilst it might cost 100,000, 200,000 or more to set up one of these deals, and that's quite a low cost for a, say, $10 million, $30 million deal. Internal stakeholders are much more comfortable with that lower upfront cost. And it also means you can properly fund resources. So it's not a project manager fitting in a PPA deal in their spare time, but you have an allocated project manager full-time or part-time for the overall 12-month process or whatever it may be. Sharing expertise between buyers, so more capable and experienced buyers can support lesser buyers in the group. And also sharing of risk, that it's a bit more comforting that you're doing this with some peers and there's power in numbers. But group deals aren't always the solution. They can present their own challenges. They do require more coordination, and that might see more increased resourcing and time. They do increase an element of uncertainty, where you don't know if the other buyers will really see through the whole procurement process and sign the deal on the dotted line at the end. And also that different buyers have different needs. Some may have a high tolerance for risk and complexity and just want to go for the best and cheapest deal, whereas others might want a more risk averse and less complex deal for their internal stakeholders. There are a myriad of forms of group deals, but I've sort of mentioned 3 here. One form, so this is my last slide, by the way. One is to form together up front, bring together 3, 5 or more like-minded organisations to go through the options analysis, run the procurement process and negotiate together. Another is where there's a bigger, larger lead buyer, and they take the lead and try and bring others with them. And Lion did this in New South Wales and Silverleaf Solar Farm with a number of their the pubs that they supply to. So Lion, the food and beverage company, and they brought in dozens of sort of New South Wales hotels to come in on that deal. And another option is procure first. So line up the wind or solar deal or the retail agreement and bring others in. And this has the benefit that when all the other buyers are going to their CFO and pitching something, it's not just a concept or an idea and it could be this and could be that. It's solar farm X at this price or wind farm Y at that price. And it's much more tangible discussion to have up front. So that's the last of my slides. Just to quickly mention again that that buyers bootcamp we have coming up. So all of our details and more information on our website, and look forward to the panel discussion later. Over to you, Aaron.
Thanks, Jonathan. And yeah, for all those, we'll circulate and encourage everybody to sign up to the BRC-A after this event. For those of you who aren't already members as buyers, it is free to join, and they provide some great resources in this space. Please remember to post any questions into the Q&A. Next up, though, we have Liam from Melbourne City Council. He's talking about his experience in 2 group buying power purchase agreements, and will give you some very useful insights if you are considering a joint PPA with other businesses. Liam is a Senior Sustainability Officer for the City of Melbourne's Climate Change Mitigation Team. He's leading projects and initiatives to help the Melbourne City Council achieve its goal of a city powered by 100% renewable energy. Having worked previously across commercial, not-for-profit and local government sectors delivering sustainability projects for over a decade, Liam has a very deep understanding of energy efficiency and the renewable energy solutions. Over to you, Liam.
Great, thanks, Aaron. And am I sharing the right slide there? Hope I am.
Looks it to me. Looks
good, excellent, always got to check. Thank you. Thanks to City of Yarra for putting on this event, and thanks to everyone in the audience today for coming along and really trying to take a proactive approach to the way you manage your electricity and sustainability, achieve your sustainability goals as well. Hopefully there'll be some useful gems in this and some good discussion afterwards as well. So City of Melbourne, like City of Yarra, have ambitious climate change targets. We have a goal to be a carbon neutral city powered by 100% renewable electricity. And many organisations that have been on that journey for a number of years, once you've sustainably designed your buildings and invested in energy efficiency and put solar on all of your roofs, there's still considerable amount of impacts that can't be avoided. So looking upstream and off-site to renewable electricity, purchasing renewable electricity through contracts is a really significant way to go. And certainly that's what City of Melbourne did with 13 other partners, including City of Yarra. And in 2017, the MREP1, the Melbourne Renewable Energy Project #1, announced Australia's first renewable energy corporate power purchase agreement, and that was the first time. It's one of the first PPAs in the country. It was one of the first group PPAs, we think, in the world, and certainly the first time that a group of different sectors, organisations from different sectors, got together to collectively purchase electricity from a newly built facility. The group's load of the 14 partners, that was 88 gigawatt hours of electricity a year, and that was enough to catalyse the construction of a new fit wind farm and bring that online. But though the group's load from that wind farm was only about a third, so the wind farm was generating 2/3, is now generating an additional 2/3 of output. So bringing additional renewable electricity into the grid. The good thing about long-term power purchase agreements is it allows organisations to take an active role in securing renewable electricity supply and tackling climate change, but also it for the partners in the MREP1 group, the PPA provides long-term price certainty. So it's a 10-year deal. There's parameters around the pricing which are known, and it enables that group of buyers to mitigate the risk of increased energy costs in a volatile electricity market, and we'll kind of look into that a little more. But so it is, think about it in terms of managing financial risk. It's hard to make the claim that you're going to be in the money and by how much in 10 years' time, because no one's got that crystal ball around how the dynamic energy market works. But you do know that it is an unpredictable market, and that you can mitigate that risk by signing these kinds of deals. So I'll talk about a bit about group processes in a little bit too, but I think it's worth noting those organisations there. Some bigger organisations and universities and corporates. There's banks, there's councils, there's a zoo, for goodness sake. I mean, it's a diverse group of organisations, and I think
Liam, just quickly, are your slides moving for everyone else, or I'm stuck on the front one?
No, they are not. There we are.
Okay.
There's a happy photo for everyone. And that's the logo farm that I was trying to refer to. The diversity of organisations there, it just speaks to that PPAs can work for a whole bunch of different organisations and different sectors. Sorry, I denied you enjoying that photo for longer there, but that's a happy snap from the launch of the MREP deal, and that's the Crowlands Community Hall, and one of the social benefits of the deal is that an amount of money gets given to the local community for very cool little projects. So it's not, again, we talk about sustainability, we talk about the financial management, but it's also social and community benefits can be delivered through these types of arrangements. And in terms of the impact for the MREP1 group, I mean, pretty significant. A new wind farm was built as a result of that deal. Collectively, the emissions reductions are in the order of nearly 100,000 tonnes of emissions a year, so nearly 1 million tonnes of emissions over the 10-year of the agreement, and the equivalent to taking a hell of a lot of cars off the road. But as I say, the wider social and community and economic benefits are really important too. And if that's something that's relevant to your organisation, then you should definitely think about how you might be able to leverage that type of benefit through any deal that you're involved in. And for MREP1, 140 regional jobs created during the construction, 8 ongoing maintenance jobs, and the regional economic growth and flow-on effects from that. That was a really important objective of the MREP1 group. And I think a good example of how metro-based organisations can support economic development in the regions and help lock in transition to low emissions, particularly if we're doing those deals now as a way to support COVID recovery. And that's exactly the kind of initiatives we need right now to ensure that the economic recovery is one that supports the transition. Here's a nice group of photos. So I've talked a little bit about the various benefits, but one of those is just a really compelling, powerful story to tell your employees, to tell your customers and your stakeholders. You better believe that all of these photos end up in everyone's annual reports and websites and glossy mags. They're pretty amazing. I think that construction photo on the top left just gives you a bit of a sense of how massive the project is. Not just the wind farm, but how significant the the PPA led to that massive bit of infrastructure being built, and that's pretty cool, and that's something that everyone in the group are very proud of. And again, you can think of creative ways that your organisation could tell that story. And I'm not sure if people have seen the Carlton and United Breweries ad. The folks behind VB and the VB ads of hard-earned thirst needs a big cold beer or whatever it is, and it's got a bunch of tradies building a solar farm because CUB signed a PPA, a solar PPA, and they've really just tied that story right back into their brand narrative. Very clever. So yeah, a range of benefits, and I'll try and draw out some of those in terms of what it's been like for the City of Melbourne from our experience after we're now 2 years into that 10-year deal. I mean, certainly it has supercharged our sustainability claims and just smashed our carbon targets out of the park, instantly. And that's, there's not too many initiatives that can have that kind of impact. But also from a financial point of view, it has provided that budget certainty and that financial risk management. We've gone through, the group has without getting too into the weeds, but the group has a partially fixed pricing model. So it's not fully fixed for 10 years. It's not variable, year on year, but it is, a portion of it is fixed. So it's quite known how much it would increase or decrease by. And certainly we've, that model has seen the group benefit from the favourable market conditions that are around at the moment. And that's gone down quite well with the finance teams, especially at the moment when things are pretty tight. And this is a group deal, so there is a role for the group working together over the time, and that's with good governance arrangements and good cooperation from all the parties. It's been a pretty easy to, and actually quite light touch, working together over the last couple of years. And there's really not, once the contract's in place, there hasn't been too much to do. And it's certainly far less work than running a procurement every 2 to 3 years. So I think maybe to drill down a little bit more into a couple of the points about kind of financial risk management. This here is a chart that shows, essentially it shows the volatility of the Victorian wholesale electricity market, and in here it's telling a story of an energy system that's in transition. Whenever your organisation goes to market for electricity, you are subject to the underlying wholesale market conditions, which you basically have no control over. And I'm sure all of your organisations have found yourselves contracting at a time when the market conditions have been unfavourable, and you've ended up having to pay high prices and sign a 2 or 3 year deal for considerably more than what you were hoping to. And what that underscores really is that just standard business as usual electricity procurement is itself not without risk. There's risk involved in signing a PPA, but there's also risk involved in doing nothing. And one of those kind of risks, so this year it was the increase in electricity prices that occurred after one of the big power stations, Hazelwood, closed in 2017. Prices are a function of demand and supply, and when supply dropped, prices went up. So if you were unlucky enough to be coming out of contract and having to sign a deal then, you would have been getting hit. And then after Hazelwood closed, prices continued to be volatile over the next few summers. And these are the kinds of spikes that could be reasonably expected to occur every time a major coal-fired power station exits the system. And certainly as coal-fired generation fleets age and reliability issues become, continue to have an impact, which is very hard to predict in terms of timing, then that's the kind of risk that your organisations are exposed to. And really, Australia is at the beginning of a an unprecedented energy transition, and it doesn't look like it's going to be a very smooth transition. We hope it will with the right policy settings, but even still, it's probably going to be pretty lumpy. And these kinds of factors contribute to that volatile and uncertain business environment. And now with COVID-19, yes, it's depressed prices in the near term, but it's slowing investment, and that's going to impact renewable investment in the medium term, less supply, and push prices higher in that medium to long term. So, these are the challenges that our organisations are facing. And by locking in long-term prices in a PPA can really help shield your organisations from that kind of volatility. And it's certainly the case that a well-designed PPA can present a valuable risk management strategy to help deliver greater budget certainty and mitigate the risk against the risk of higher prices in the medium term. And that's why you're seeing organisations like Amazon and Aldi and AHA, and that's just the organisation starting with A, that are doing these things. They're not dyed in the wool greenies. They're savvy commercial operators, and that's at its heart. That's one of the biggest financial reasons for looking at these kind of deals. So if you need to engage some of your finance people, a little bit of Energy Market 101 could be useful. Just to talk to some of the other points for us at City of Melbourne is to kind of bring the benefits that we've seen. We've had our emissions reduction plan, like Yarra, have been working at it for a number of years, and we've had our targets in place, and we signed the MREP deal in, it went live January 2019. So you can see, huge drop off in our emissions in 2018-19, and that's with 6 months of renewable electricity, and then we're projecting another huge drop off with a full year of renewables. So that's a 45% reduction in emissions in 18 months, and that's just on top of all the other investments that we've done, where we're almost as good as Yarra in emissions reductions. So that's that's when you're talking about making credible sustainability claims, saying that you're powered by renewables is, the gold standard, and very, very powerful and much, more tangible. You can point to the project. You can, make it very clear we're getting our energy from over there, and these are the results. So, yeah, lots of benefits for us, and again, being a local council with community emissions reduction targets, we want to support the business community to reduce emissions as well, and so our councillors said you must take the learnings from MREP 1 and try and support organisations to do it again. So we essentially, using our experience of the process, we ran a group deal as a facilitator, not a buyer, and helped support organisations to go through the PPA transaction process and help project manage that. And Stephen from ISPT was one of the organisations involved in the MREP 2 deal, which was actually a little bit bigger than MREP 1, but also it took half the time and less than half the transaction cost because of the, one, the efficiencies of knowing how to do it better the second time round, but also the amount of offers. The market is maturing a lot more, and there's some good deals to be had. But what it really shows is that, again, group deals are a really viable option for organisations that might not have the scale or capability to contract alone. Those organisations from anywhere from 2, 5, 10, 20 gigawatt hours worth of electricity, but by forming together, it can really benefit from that group process. And I guess this is just reiterating things that JP said in his slide, but in a prettier diagram, if I may say so. But having a group deal, it means, essentially you can increase your purchasing power and achieve that greater impact but be able to access more, greater choice of offers and sharper pricing, better, negotiate better terms, and importantly, share the workload. I mean, these are, these are becoming mainstream types of arrangements, but they're pretty involved as well. So being able to share the work with others is very helpful. So if you're, asking the question, I suppose, would you want to go on a try and do a PPA individually or do it as part of a group? There's pros and cons. It's a group deal, certainly not fit for purpose for everybody, but some of those benefits are there. Shared effort, shared costs, potential for sharper pricing, that less risk, safety in numbers element, and it's really important to resource the kind of facilitation role in that, to coordinate all the parties together. But again, if you were thinking of an individual deal, obviously it's less complex. You can personalize the type of deal structure that suits your business needs and requirements and risk appetite. So a few things to think about there. Certainly, where to go for information. I'm sure your local council will have some excellent information for you. City of Yarra will, depending on, the conversations today, but there could be, further work through with Yarra businesses as a result of today's session, but also the Business Renewable Centre is a fantastic resource for information. So check it out. And with that, I will wrap up. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Liam. That's very useful. Next up, we're going to have Stephen, who's going to talk to his business, ISPT's participation in that group buying MREP2, group buying purchase agreement, how and why they got involved, and importantly, how they've managed the procurement and negotiation with all of their stakeholders. Stephen is the Sustainability Manager at ISPT and has 20 years experience in green building performance and sustainability, delivering on innovative environmental solutions within the built environment. Stephen's driven by the opportunity to facilitate and implement leading edge solutions that ensure strategic and integrated sustainability outcomes. He's previously worked with state and federal governments, local councils, property developers, large corporates and community groups to demonstrate sustainability measures across residential, commercial and industrial facilities. So through this experience, Stephen led the development and delivery of the key sustainability initiatives and green infrastructure opportunities at both a building and precinct scale for ISPT. So very experienced in the property industry. I know there's quite a few people interested in property development and how we make our built environment less carbon intensive. So over to Stephen, and remember to add any questions you've got in the chat function. Cheers, go Steve.
Excellent, thank you very much, Aaron, and hello everyone. So it's a great pleasure to be able to speak to you today. As mentioned, ISPT was involved in the second round of the Melbourne Renewable Energy Project. So I think we'll probably see a number of similar themes that's come through Jonathan as well as Liam's presentations, but hopefully I'll put a bit of a spin on it from the perspective of ISPT being a property owner and the experience that we got through participating in NREP. And while we're looking at power purchasing agreements. So just a quick outline. So over the next 15 minutes or so, I'll just share a little bit about who ISPT is, why we got involved in the MREP project. I'll talk a bit more detail around the governance structure and process around MREP, and then just share some closing thoughts around some of the benefits and perhaps some advice that I would share with others that are thinking about going down this path. But just to, I guess, give a little bit of context to who ISPT is. So for those that may not have come across ISPT before, ISPT stands for Industry Superannuation Property Trust. And we invest in property on behalf of industry super funds. So there's about 30 odd in industry super funds that you see listed on the screen there. And together they represent about 50% of working Australians. who have their investments and superannuation invested in property through ISPT. So if you can see your industry super fund listed there, then it's more than likely that you also have part of your superannuation invested in properties that ISPT own and manage. To give a bit of a sense of the scale of ISPT, so we have about $19 billion worth of funds under management, and those investments cover a range of different sectors, including commercial, shopping centres, logistics and warehousing, education, as well as some development activities. So we've got about 134 properties across the portfolio, and they really spread right across both up and down the eastern seaboard, as well as into South Australia and Western Australia. And just, I guess, to sort of, again, put a little bit more context around why would ISPT be interested in this? So first of all, just thinking about that investor base and, ultimately the mums and dads who have their superannuation invested, we really take our responsibility seriously about how we invest that money on their behalf. So obviously, first and foremost is about maximising the returns of those investments, but equally we think about the way in which we do that. So trying to be ethical and transparent, and also thinking about how do we minimise the environmental impact, but even starting to look more beyond just minimising the negative impacts, but how do we start to shift that towards a positive impact. And important to note here, and if we look at that circular chart on the left-hand side, this is our ESG framework, or Environment, Social and Governance framework, that represents the material issues that are most important to ISPT and our stakeholders. And it's probably safe to say that climate change is the #1 issue of our investors and our broader stakeholder group. So thinking about that, we also have developed a carbon neutral pathway, and that chart on the right-hand side of the screen starts to outline the sort of 4 key steps that we have on that pathway. And probably not, sort of anything surprising here, but the first step within that journey is about making sure that our buildings are as energy efficient as possible. We've got a number of different programs that are rolling out solar PV within our sites. So that's that on-site renewable opportunity. And then looking at where we can't do that and things perhaps aren't technically or financially viable, looking to procure electricity through off-site renewable means. And then anything that's remaining in terms of our carbon footprint, so things that we can't avoid or reduce in terms of that carbon emission footprint, then we'd look to purchase carbon offsets to offset that to a zero carbon position. So Liam mentioned the MREP2 project, so this is the second round of the Melbourne Renewable Energy Project. So I won't go into too much detail here. I'll just sort of, again, note that we've got a range of different businesses that were participating in that. So we've got the property sector, we've got education sector, construction and manufacturing. And, not an insignificant buying power through that group. So there was about, I think, memory serves, about 113 gigawatt hours of load, of annual load, which represents about 22,000 households. And for the City of Melbourne, that is equivalent to about 5% of the city's emissions. So together, quite a significant buying power. Putting a little bit more flesh on the bones of what that structure and the governance process looks like for MREP2. You can see here a chart which sort of starts to illustrate that in a bit more detail. We had the different participants as part of the buying group. We all worked together under an MOU that just sort of put some structure and a bit of a mechanism around how we wanted to work together, what were the commitments of the group, what was the intent and the purpose of us working together, how would we share the costs as part of that process. We were fortunate that we had RMIT, who were participants in round 1 of MREP, that put up their hand to take on a lead role. So they really sort of drove and brought together the group in terms of activities, and obviously also very ably led through the City of Melbourne to help facilitate and bring that group together. Through that process, we also had some external service providers. So we had some external support through Norton Rhodes Fulbright, who were providing legal advice, and they were engaged directly by RMIT on behalf of the group. And we also had some energy procurement advice and energy market advice that was provided by Energetics. So together through the process, through the development of the RFT documentation and the review and the negotiations and evaluations of the tenders that came through. They were very, very important in supporting the group. Just thinking about that process and the timeline, it was about a 2-year journey from start to end. You know, it started off probably mid-2018 where the initial expression of interest was released by City of Melbourne. We got involved through some early discussions in that process. Early on, there was a number of workshops and facilitation steps where the City of Melbourne was trying to just gauge a sense of, you know, what were the aims and objectives of each of the different participants, and did we have some alignment? We were able to put together a business case midway through 2019 through the support of Energetics to really, I guess, validate that we had a viable option. If we put something out to market, would it be something that the buyers, the buying group would actually be able to take back to their senior management? Through that process, it was indicated that yes, there was something that we could pursue. So the group formed or signed that formal MOU. Through that, we then commenced the process of preparing documentation to go to tender. That was released in November. Bids came back, it was probably just before Christmas actually, in 2019. And then we commenced the process of the tender evaluation early on in 2020. We were able to go through that tender evaluation. We shortlisted some preferred bidders. We entered into a best and final offer stage. We selected a preferred bidder and we entered into contract negotiations around March of 2020. That led through to a final contract execution towards the back end of May. And we had a successful contract that was entered into, and for us it commenced as of the 1st of July. I think there were 3 participants that had an early start date of about 1 July, and there's a number of others that will then roll in as of the 1st of January next year. Again, just to add a little bit more detail to the actual kind of contract and the structure. So as you can see here, we just so happened to agree and finalise an agreement with Tango Energy, who was also the recipient of the first round of MREP. So again, we had Pacific Hydro, who was the generator and the owner of the wind farm, and then the retailer was Tango Energy. So under this arrangement, we've got 2 agreements in place. We've got a retail supply agreement that is directly with Tango, and then we've also got a supply agreement with Pacific Hydro for the LGCs. So we've got a 1-to-1 LGC for every megawatt hour of electricity that we purchase as part of that arrangement. So we've each individually got a separate retail and LGC supply agreement with each of the participants with it, Tango and Pacific Hydro, but that sort of forms part of that broader arrangement that we've got as part of the buyers group. I just thought I'd close off with a few sort of summary remarks. So as I sort of touched on earlier, the benefits for us in participating in this is that it clearly supports our carbon reduction initiatives and aligns very closely with the expectations that are placed on us by our investors and our broader stakeholder group. Again, I think as both Jonathan and Liam have touched on as well, the pricing structure that we're able to get through this and the long-term nature of that provides some budget certainty for us, and then it limits that exposure that we have to those price increases over time. And the way that Liam described that pricing structure in terms of the partial fixed, partial variable plays out in this arrangement as well. And beyond just that sort of environment and financial aspect, we also get the experience that we've had through this process being part of a buyers group has really enabled us to explain and demonstrate that to our internal senior management team that yes, this is a viable option. We get great outcomes. It's working towards our environmental and financial objectives, which we can then lend to other states and other jurisdictions. So we've actually just kicked off a process with Energetics to explore a PPA for New South Wales to cover our New South Wales load. And then thinking about what advice that I might give to others. Again, probably similar themes here, but I think for us, one of the early things that we did as part of the MREP process was just to get some clarity around what were our drivers. So what were we trying to achieve through the project? Was it strictly an environmental sort of carbon reduction approach? Was it just trying to get the best financial result? And for that regard, I think pretty consistently for all the participants, at least in our bias group, was that there was a shared sort of feeling that we certainly wanted the environmental outcome, and that was a key and clear driver, but it had to be balanced with that financial expectation. So we weren't willing to get that environmental outcome at any cost. It needed to be cost competitive as well, so that we could get it through our internal management. I think what plays into that in part as well is what the individual organisation's risk appetite is. And Jonathan at the start touched on, there's various models that of PPAs that are out there, and some present more risk exposure than others. I think the group that we had a fairly low tolerance for risk, and so we took an approach that was perhaps less risky than others, or at least perceived risk. So that's really played into the way that we're able to communicate that risk back up the chain to our management. And I know, particularly talking to our Chief Financial Officer, there were some particular questions and pointed questions that he had, so we were able to allay some concerns and fears through that. Again, I think just being able to work as part of a group, there were safety in numbers. We did have the experience of others in the group that had been through the process before, and equally with the City of Melbourne supporting that facilitation, to be able to then work through that in a way that, de-risked in some instances, and helped to navigate through the process that would have been, a little bit challenging trying to do it on our own. So having that group to sort of work through the nuances and the challenges that we faced along the way was really useful. And I think particularly for us, given that it was a 2-year journey for us, we're engaging early with our business and our management helped us sort of smooth that pathway. I think to some extent we treated it like we would any other electricity procurement exercise, but we did have to explain, the rationale for why we were doing it. There was an expectation from our investors and stakeholders. A long-term contract of this nature had some perceived risks that we needed to work through, but being able to step through with the likes of our fund managers, our CEO, our Chief Financial Officer, so that when we got to executing the agreement, there were no surprises. There was nothing that they hadn't been aware of or had some familiarity with. So being able to engage them early and frequently along that step, I think really helped the process move through as well. So that was all that I wanted to share with you today. Hopefully you got something out of that, and I look forward to taking any questions that you might have as part of the panel discussion. So
Excellent. Thanks.
Throw that back to you, Aaron.
Great, thanks, Stephen. That's really useful, and big takeaway from me right at the end there is the importance of getting your senior management involved in the process and on board, and I guess treating it when it comes to the decision making down to this is a lot like any other energy procurement procedure that a lot of companies go through every couple of years. So we're going to open it up to Q&A. There's been a few questions posted in the chat, some of which have been answered already. I'm just looking for one of the ones that Liam and Jonathan haven't been answered yet, but if anybody would like to ask a question directly, please take yourself off mute and speak up. Just a couple here. Liam, Stephen, what is the smallest load that is part of either MREP 1 or MREP 2?
Yeah, and just to pick that one up. So I mean, the answer is a couple of gigawatt hours was about the smallest buyer, and there is a lower limit to the size of a business or a business's consumption. But as part of a group, that's a way to overcome that that challenge. So if you're in a group of 50 or more gigawatt hours, then you've got a good chance of accessing the benefits of the PPA. If you're trying to contract a loan with 2 gigawatt hours, you may not even be able to receive any offers at that level, or if you do, they'll be, I guess, innovative types of models which may present different types of financial risk profiles and exposure to spot markets. But That's again why we think, you know, and to be honest, most businesses are not 50 gigawatt hours a year. So that's where we think group deals can really play an important role in helping more businesses access the benefits of PPAs.
On the same theme, Esther asked, is there a trend to them being more viable for smaller energy users, which Jonathan's answered in the chat. But Jonathan, do you just want to elaborate on some of the options around? And I guess one thing I'll add in there is this is a very much an evolving space, and whilst far too early to go into any details, I was having a conversation with a person in the finance world yesterday, and they're looking at how they can get involved with, I guess, a portfolio approach to PPAs. So, that would be exactly to Esther's point of wrapping up a group of very small businesses, which when you combine them into a portfolio helps reduce that risk profile, and whether or not that is a way they can also execute PPAs. But Jonathan, there are a few other options in the market. Would you like to elaborate a bit further?
Yeah, I replied in the chat, and I think it's also important to consider the nature of the business. So if you're 2 gigawatt hours, that's 2,000 megawatt hours per annum. So you might be paying $40,000 to $60,000 a year for electricity. So that's possible. But it's interesting to see that a few schools have signed PPAs, a couple via Flow Power. And they're kind of the opposite of group, where they go and sign large-scale PPAs with wind and solar farms and then sell off bite-sized chunks. And in those cases, schools are quite suitable in a way to PPAs because they're generally, they're going to be around in 10 or 20 years. They're still going to be using electricity. So they have that sort of long-standing, I wouldn't say credit rating, they're hardly kind of rated by Standard & Poor's or something as AA plus or whatever, but they're credit worthy in that they're likely to be around in 10 years. They're stable businesses and using electricity, so they might be suitable. Whereas if it's businesses in a more volatile industry, cafes and that sort of thing, they change hands and close down and that sort of thing. So they may be less suitable to that long-term commitment that justifies investment in new wind and solar.
Yep. Excellent. So one of the questions that's just come through is, what is the industry's view on firm PPAs? Are energy users calling for this mechanism? I guess I'll throw that back to you, Jonathan, because that really comes down to that difference between the different PPA models of sleeved, retail, wholesale PPA models. Do you just want to explain a little bit how they execute the firming within the contracts?
I'm even so deep in this stuff, and Stephen's just come through a process assessing all those different options. It'd be great to hear from him, but it really depends on the buyer, and you can compare them like for like. How did you go, Stephen?
Well, I think we worked through that process as part of the buyers group to really ascertain what were potentially what was the risk appetite of the group and what were the objectives. So for us, what we were trying to do is get to a point where we had a retail contract that was, not dissimilar to any other electricity contract that we had. So we needed to find a retail sort of supply-linked solution that would enable us to, be able to meet all of our electricity needs without having to sort of try and find a mechanism by which we, we're managing sort of off-peak and shoulder periods that may be set outside the generation profile of the wind or solar generator. So from that perspective, I think it was really, for us, we wanted that retail arrangement that it encapsulated the whole package. So that was just sort of part of the buyers group's original intent. Liam, if you had anything else that you wanted to add to that from that perspective?
No, I think just to kind of reiterate the same point, that the group had a view that around what their risk appetite was, and the energy advisors helped the group assess the financial scenarios of different products, and the group made their decision based on the evaluation criteria. So they weren't necessarily calling for that type of mechanism, but they were looking at, how risky is it? What are the price outcomes? And looking at evaluating a deal that way.
I guess to add to that, it speaks to, it's not just about the PPA, but what you do with it. So do you sign a wholesale PPA to really underpin that new investment, or via a retailer? You see City of Sydney have a flow power offer, which is combination of wind and solar, and it sees 70% load matching. So they're making an effort to combine the right technologies to match their load. And University of Queensland has coupled their solar investment with on-site storage. So they're looking to enter into that space of 100% solar coupled with storage increasing over time to help meet their demand. So that speaks to what are your key underlying objectives, and also the environmental claims that you're wishing to make. So it's all sort of tied up in that mix of options, and what Stephen and Liam so expertly navigated through in MREP 2.
Yep, excellent. Now, Chris has asked Jonathan, but I'm going to redirect it to Liam. Is there a learning curve developing in the industry about PPA procurement that's reducing the time to conclude PPAs, both at an individual business level and in the group buying? You said you halve the time on the second one.
I absolutely think there is. I mean, MREP started, I think, 2015 and contracted in 2017, and then, you know, City of Melbourne were involved in another process through 2020. And, you know, in that time, most retailers had a PPA product. Most, you know, energy advisors, legal advisors, procurement advisors had knowledge around the process. So, you know, it's a lot easier to draft a contract when you've done it a couple of times from the advisor's point of view, and that flows back to, you know, that learning curve flows back to the buyers that don't have to pay as much for that work. Organisations like the Business Renewable Centre have been building the capacity of buyers and developers for the last couple of years, and that's, you know, that's had an enormous difference, I think, in standardising the language, defining what the issues are. So yeah, absolutely, there's that learning curve has been definitely in play, and it all flows to you know, better outcomes for buyers at the end of the day.
And I guess over time, it's also going to bring the size of the participants down and make the market more readily available, because one of the other factors that's prohibitive is if you're spending large amounts of money on consultants and other things, then that's going to eat into a fair bit of your power over a 10-year commitment if you're only a small user. But as that improves and those costs come down, it'll make it more viable for more of those smaller businesses or smaller energy loads to get involved. So Chris has also asked, and I'll perhaps direct this to Stephen, have you considered batteries as part of the firming capacity, and what firming capacity is needed beyond the PPA? Was that considered as part of?
Can I just pause there? The terminology in the PPA space is, you know, there's a lot of techie terms, and I don't think maybe some of the people in the audience might benefit from having the concept of firming defined. I'm not volunteering to do that, by the way. I'm looking at JP.
So I was hoping you weren't going to point to me, Liam. I'm glad to handle that.
I think it's good to remind ourselves that whilst we have an energy system, the energy market really is primarily a financial market. And people think of firming as the ability to meet demand when there's less wind and solar or other available resources. I also think it's a financial term where if the price goes really high and you don't have your solar and wind available and your demand is high, that you have dispatchable or other sort of technologies to call upon during those times to manage that price risk over time as well. So there's sort of physical firming, making sure supply meets demand, but that's really done at a whole national or state level. So it's also at an individual corporate level, managing that financial risk. So that's what I would consider firming. And maybe that's a base for Liam or Stephen to build upon for their PPAs.
Yeah, and I guess just to say, I mean, it is a consideration for buyers, the firming that's there, but again, I can only speak from the experience of seeing 2 retail PPA processes. So a retail PPA, it's essentially the retailer's job to figure out how they firm it. It's not the buyer's job to do that. So you know, I can't make any claim around have we considered batteries for firming. I mean, again, no, that wasn't a big feature of the buying groups. It was, again, it puts the risk around that, or the responsibility for that sits with the retailer.
Yeah.
I think to add to that as well, that the concept of PPAs and going 100% renewable is about buying enough renewables to cover you across the year. That will mean there'll be times where you have excess supply compared to your demand, and times where you have a shortfall of supply compared to demand. But at those times you buy from the market or sell to the market, and that's how the energy system works. So I think that's quite natural. But there is a case that as more renewables come in, as is happening now, that we need more coupling with storage to help support more and more renewables over time.
Yeah, I think I'll just add to maybe what Liam was saying earlier about the arrangements that we've got under MREP is that, you know, to meet that full renewable claim that we've got, we're getting LGCs for every megawatt hour that we're consuming. So that sort of enables us to say, you know, 100% of our electricity procured for Victoria under MREP is renewable because of the LGC component. So there might be times physically where it's not sort of necessarily generating renewables, but the retailer working with the generator is accessing their full portfolio of renewables and then getting access to those LGCs that we can then use to make those claims. So yeah, there wasn't any sort of specific requirement or criteria as part of the RFT that looked at that sort of firming specifically, or, you know, what technologies would be backed to manage that. So yeah, as Liam said, it was very much up to the tenderers to respond to how they would just manage firming in general.
Excellent. All right. So there's not a lot of more questions coming through, and I think we've picked up everything from the chat so far. So
sorry, there is one, and I know we're about to jump into Q&A, but okay. There's a question from Adam. Is there an MREP3 in process? How do businesses get onto one of these groups? That's probably a burning question. Do you guys at Yarra want to say anything there?
Look, the straight up answer at the moment is no, there's not. There is certainly part of the reason for holding today's session is to try and understand a little bit further about the interest in the market and what businesses are out there and what businesses need to try and enter into PPAs and move towards 100% renewable. So it's certainly something that I think everybody presenting today would like to see more of happen. But when is very much up in the air. There's nothing concrete in place at the moment. Liam, I don't know if, or Jonathan.
Yeah, no, I mean, the same kind of answer. So, you know, we know group deals have a lot of benefits, and we know that a lot of buyers, you know, need a group process to be able to participate. And sessions like today hopefully help identify interested buyers, and then we can continue the conversation, you know, with Yarra, with City of Melbourne, with BRC and others. And if there's a group of aligned organisations, then, you know, your local government friends and BRC friends and potentially others can support that process and you know, hopefully firm that up if there's enough interest.
Yep.
If I can, Aaron, just to jump in City of Yarra again, just to reiterate to the best thing that any businesses that are interested in that can do is to let us know, big, small. Otherwise, if you're doing PPAs off your own bat, not interested in a group, still let us know. So certainly there's discussions we're having with BRC, with City of Melbourne, others. It's something that we're interested in, what that mechanism could look like. But the best thing that could help us is to know what sort of businesses are actually interested and what sort of load there is. So just second that again, let us know. And that's certainly part of what today is about for us. And yeah, we'll just have to see where it moves from here.
Yep. Excellent. Well, thanks for that. And thank you to everyone. So for the next part of today, and I'm just going to go back to sharing my screen that we want to do, is a little bit with that in mind, is we're going to move you into breakout rooms to have some discussions with the presenters from today and with myself or Indy Lingham, who's also from City of Yarra and led our participation in the original MREP deal. And we're going to go into the breakout rooms. This won't be recorded. The idea of these breakout rooms is to treat it a little bit as you would if we were in a physical setting, where you might mingle afterwards and talk with presenters, talk with other businesses, exchange details. It's not easy to do in a COVID-19 restricted world. We're going to see how it goes. We haven't tried it before, so please bear with us and give it a try. I've put some slides up there around some discussion points or other things that you can talk about or have a think about, but feel free to ask any questions that you have of the presenters who are in your room and or the other businesses. There's a whole vast variety of people on this call who are all involved in different parts of the market. So give it a try and we'll see how it goes, and then we'll come back in about 10 minutes or so and wrap up and say thank you and goodbye. All right, cheers, see how this goes.